Welcome to Minority Matters. I'm your host, Sylvester Smith. This month, we're going to discuss the recent primary elections and hear our panel of political experts share their thoughts about the upcoming general election season. Joining me are Leon Jones, a Republican and attorney with the Jones Law Firm in Fayetteville, Lamar Davis, a Democrat and Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Mike Beebe, and Malcolm Glover, a political analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. It was an exciting primary season. I think it's the first time probably in the history of Arkansas that Republicans had a slate of candidates to choose from up and down the ballot, and Democrats, it seemed, had to go seek out candidates. So let's talk about what happened in the recent primary, and I'm just going to throw it out to the floor. Malcolm, maybe would you like to start?
Well, you know, speaking to what you said earlier, I think the only really contested race on the Democratic side was the race for governor between Mike Ross, former congressman, served for 12 years, South Arkansas, and the teacher Lynette Bryant. And of course, Mike Ross won 84% of the vote, I believe. But I think for someone like Lynette Bryant, teacher, African-American female, who didn't really have much of a campaign compared to Mike Ross, I think she can take solace in the fact that she had about 24,000 votes. And the only reason why she ran was to say, hey, we need to have some competition on the Democratic side, just like they have on the Republican side. And so it was interesting to see her kind of make that announcement. But of course, Mike Ross was able to win the victory easily.
Well, what about any of the Republican races? Were there any surprises with regard to the outcomes as far as this panel is concerned?
Well, I think that there were a couple of things. I don't know if I would say there were surprises, but I thought that, for example, Duncan Barrett's race for treasurer against Dennis Milligan, I thought that race would be a little closer, quite honestly, and it was close. It was pretty close, but I thought it would be a little closer, and I honestly thought that Duncan Barrett would have pulled that out. Especially with his stance on kind of, I call the Walmart culture, him not taking money from lobbyists and that type of situation. So I thought that was a little surprising, but for the most part, I didn't think the other ones were. I thought that Ken Yang was going to make a better splash, but I think what hurt him was one of his ads that he posted kind of late in the campaign. I think that kind of hurt him, and so. But otherwise, I don't think that there are many surprises.
I agree with Leon, but first let me thank you for having us and thank you for this format. I think it's incredibly important that we have some diversity in the media, particularly the mainstream media. I was looking at election night coverage and I didn't see any African Americans who were doing commentary. I didn't see any Latinos who were doing commentary. I did see some women, so we are making some progress, but thank you for providing this format. I think it's incredibly important that diverse views are represented in the media. So. I think Leon is right. Most of the surprises were on the Republican side. I was surprised at how strong Coleman ran. And I was also surprised at how much money Asa had to spend in order to only get 70% of the vote. So I think this speaks to what I would call the civil war within the Republican Party. It still is searching for identity. You have the Tea Party and you have the mainstream business Republicans. And I think going into the fall, that's going to be the story. You know, which mask will they have to wear to appeal to voters? I mean, you can't be both to the voters. You're going to have to pick one. And so are they going to lean towards the Tea Party or are they going to go to the mainstream and appeal to the broader deal? So I think that was the story of the night.
Well, one of the interesting dynamics that has come to pass is the shift from Northwest Arkansas dominance in these Republican primaries. Because I used to joke that to be the Republican nominee, you needed to be from Northwest Arkansas. But yet it seems, and you brought it up with the Duncan Barrett, Dennis Milligan race. I mean, here's Dennis Milligan. Sure, he was previously a chair of the state party, but he's from Saline County. Right. And you've got this guy from the heart of Northwest Arkansas who was, I would say, a pretty well-respected and well-known legislator there. And it didn't seem like that race turned out at all what people thought. Now, Dennis is a savvy politico, and he has Jim Harris, who is battle-tested from our days together in the Huckabee administration. But I just really thought that the Northwest Arkansas power would sway Duncan. So I guess the next question I have for the panel, and especially for you, Leon, is does geography still matter in Republican primaries? Is this an outlier, this Duncan Baird and Dennis Milligan race, or is it a tale of things to come?
Well, and first of all, let me echo what Lamar said. That I definitely think that this is a forum that's definitely needed, and we need to do more about this and maybe have some other conversations around this. But to your point, I don't think it's an outlier. I think Northwest Arkansas is still very much in play as it relates to the Republican base. I think that you're going to continue to have that, and we'll definitely see that going into the general election with Leah Williams' race against Jim Dotson, right, up in Northwest Arkansas for District 93. So we're going to definitely see that, and it'll kind of tell a tale, if you will. But I don't know. I can't really tell you why Duncan Baird didn't win that race. He did very well. Okay, so let me say that on the outset. He did well, and he had a great showing in that race. But I believe that although Northwest Arkansas is not an outlier, that Central Arkansas, especially going to 2nd and 4th districts particularly, are starting to turn a tide towards the Republican Party. And so you were able to see where Dennis Milligan was able to capitalize on his location in Saline County and kind of move that forward with some momentum.
Well, that makes sense. And I'm also excited to see Republicans from Northwest Arkansas who have historically controlled the party being open-minded to the ideas of the candidates rather than just making their determination based upon where they're from. So I think it's a good example of the evolution of the party. Well, before we wrap up the primary discussion, I think it's appropriate for us to talk about the Attorney General runoff. What are your thoughts and predictions about that June 10th race between David Sterling and Leslie Rutledge?
I think turnout is really going to be key. I mean, Leslie Rutledge early on had both an online campaign and tried to get endorsements from former Governor Mike Huckabee and other well-known conservatives. And so I think she'll try to use that to her advantage, but it'll be interesting to see whether or not those supporters are going to turn out at a time when most people are on vacation and doing their whole summer thing. So it's really going to depend on who's going to be able to really get their folks, their soldiers, to the polls.
No, I think he's right. And I think that the issue that they're going to have in that particular race, because I really think that Leslie Rutledge would have won had it been just between David Sterling and her. But because they had a third person that, and I'm not going to say she siphoned votes, if you will, but she earned those votes that she got, talking about Patricia Nation. But I believe that, to his point, in the summer it's going to be tough. June 10th, you know, I guess the best part about this election on June 10th is that school will just be letting out because of the snow days, right? So people won't have gone too much en masse out of the state. But I think Leslie Rutledge can pull it out. I think David Sterling is kind of positioning himself to be more fringe, especially with his stance on stand your ground and some other issues that I don't think that the Attorney General should really take up. So I think you'll see more savvy voters in the runoff versus just kind of a general electorate.
Yeah, I'm going to take I don't have a horse in that runoff race, obviously, but as a former employee with Mark Pryor and Mike Beebe, I know the Attorney General's office is incredibly important. You mentioned stand your ground. The position of David Sterling, who was a former classmate of mine, scares me. It's wrong for Arkansas. I think it's wrong for the nation. And I would hope that Democratic voters, who I understand can vote in the runoff primary, will see this for what it is and support someone who would not take an irresponsible and dangerous position. I mean, if you look at those who have been shot as a result of stand your ground laws, they look like us at this table. And so I think when David takes a position like that, it's wrong for Arkansas and it's wrong for the nation. So if Democratic voters can do anything about that, I hope that we would do so in masses.
Wow. So that sounds like a challenge that you're making to some of your fellow Democrats out there.
It is.
Wow. Well, that's a first for our show, but I'm excited to see what happens with that. Well, let's talk about the fall. What are your predictions about what's going to happen in the fall? I know that the Democrat Party, your people, Lamar, are aggressively seeking to get back control of the State House or the State Senate, and they're hoping to maintain control in the governor's office. What are your predictions as to what's going to happen? And let's start at the top. Let's start with the U.S. Senate race. Do you think Mark Pryor will be able to fight off the Tom Cotton challenge?
Yes, I do. I think the poll that came out, the NBC March poll, was pretty accurate. I don't think that the lead is probably 10 points. But as we talked about before, I think with Mark Pryor, you have name recognition, you have a known commodity, you have someone in our community who we know who has supported civil rights legislation, who supported African Americans on different levels, who's invited President Obama to Arkansas, which I think is really key. It talks about who Mark Pryor is. In the midst of this national tragedy, he was the one person who said, I want our president to come to Valonia, which we know is not a Democratic hotbed. That speaks to who he is. So yes, I think Arkansas voters want someone who can work across party lines. They want someone who can get things done in Washington. Tom Cotton is a fringe candidate, so I think Mark Pryor would be successful in that. On the governor's race, I think there are benefits to a primary. I think it's forced Mike Ross to focus. It's forced him to work in base communities. It's forced him to get things done earlier because he had to fight in the primary. So I think that's going to serve him well. I think, again, you have someone who's more mainstream than Asa Hutchinson appears to be at this point. So I think at the top of the ticket, we're doing pretty good. I don't know that the bottom of the ticket will really drive.
Before you go to the bottom of the ticket, I'd like to hear their thoughts about these two races at the top.
Well, I think one of the things is that Arkansans seem to be going toward a more deliberative person in the role of a U.S. Senator. And so I think it's probably safe to say that Mark Pryor isn't necessarily a cheerleader, and he doesn't necessarily, give the most exciting speeches. But I think a lot of Arkansans on both sides of the political spectrum are saying, you know what, he's serious, though. And in many ways, he's more of an independent than a Democrat. So that might accrue to his benefit. It didn't seem like it would a year ago, but now it seems to be working. For the race for governor, it'll be interesting to see. It's going to be a turnout game. I think the thing is, both Asa Hutchinson and Mike Ross have conservative voting records. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not Mike Ross will be able to appeal to central Arkansas Democrats to turn out to the polls and vote for him, when in the past they saw him more so as a conservative Democrat and not someone that would necessarily stand up for some of the issues that they care most about. And there are even Republicans who still have, kind of issues with Asa. Asa ran in 2006, so he'll have to confront that whole idea of him again. So it'll be interesting to see, and debates will tell the tale there. Whether or not either one of them will win, I think that will be a squeaker.
Well, we're gonna get to you, Leon,
Sure.
but do you really think, Malcolm, that debates actually impact elections? Because as someone who's worked in political campaigns and is a student of the process, I really believe that the people who tune into debates, there are two categories of them. I'd say one, the rabid supporters of each candidate watch to support their candidate and cheer the TV like most of us cheer at football or baseball or basketball games. And then second, there's that savvy, educated person who really wants to understand. But I think that the general populace, the average everyday Arkansan, I'd argue that they're most impacted by the media, the television and the radio commercials. I mean, what are the thoughts of everyone else here?
I mean, I would totally agree with that, Sylvester. I think where debates might help is really on the margins. The person who hasn't made up their mind yet, the independent whose fire might not really be set by Pryor, but they're still uncertain about Tom Cotton because he hasn't served long enough. Or their fire is not lit by Asa Hutchinson, but they were never a big fan of Mike Ross, but they're going to vote and exercise their right to vote. And so that person could make the difference, especially in these elections that might be really close.
No, I can absolutely agree with you there. And my thought all along about that Senate race has been that it would be a 51-49 type race, and that the prior fatigue, along with some of these tough votes that the senator's taken on things like Obamacare, would pull him down, and that the Republican wave would boost Cotton up. And I guess we'll just have to see. What are your thoughts, Leon?
Well, to start at the U.S. Senate race, I think prior to the primary, I was probably thinking that it's going to be a 51-49, and I still think it's going to be 51-49. And I'll be quite honest, Mark Pryor is a household name, right? He's been around, his dad's been around, his family's been around. And so, Tom Cotton is facing an uphill battle. But considering, and I know we're talking locally and we're talking Arkansas, but considering the national news now with the veterans debacle, if you will, and the scandal that's coming out, especially out of Phoenix and other veterans' homes throughout the U.S., Mark Pryor may have some questions to answer. And, and you got Tom Cotton, who is a veteran, who has served in the military, who, has served valiantly, and, his commercial that he came out with about a month ago with his drill sergeant, I thought was a good commercial. And so I don't know if that'll tip the scale, but I definitely think it will bring the conversation more into focus for Tom Cotton. As it relates to the governor's race, I think that race is going to be tight. I said it all along. I still say it. It's going to be a tight race. I think that to Malcolm's point, there are people on both sides of the aisle that are going to be for Asa Hutchinson, going to be for Mike Ross. So you got those. So both of these candidates are looking for what we call those purple voters, right? Those independents who are looking out there. And to your question on debates, if we're looking at the debates, those savvy political minded individuals are going to watch those debates and they'll be able to make some decisions based on that. So I think the debates will help somewhat for that purple voter, but not for your, staunch Republican or, staunch Democrat.
Well, I've always been very fond of the debates myself and proud that AATN plays a role. And I also want to say, Lamar, that the credit for us having this format goes to the leadership here at AATN and the generous people in our audience who are kind enough to contribute. Not to me, but I think you're right. I think this is a needed forum, and I'm glad that we're all here today. But I want to make sure credit goes to who it's due. I think that for the first time in many, many years, with those top two races, the debates, especially those televised here, really could have an impact. Because I feel the same way about the Hutchinson and Ross race as I do about the Senate race. I believe that, contrary to what the polls say, it is going to be very tight. And you've got two well-known brands that Arkansans are familiar with, some in a good way, some in a bad way, and that people are going to have to, at some point, set their biases aside and just be open to the ideas that these gentlemen bring forth for Arkansas and see whose ideas rule the day. And the debate format will be an important part of that, because the thing about media, and I do believe that it's powerful in politics, but it is also disingenuous, because I believe that the right media campaign could make the devil look like he is the most honest person that you ever meet. And contrary, I mean, you take Mother Teresa, and if Mother Teresa were running for U.S. Senate right now, there'd be 8 negative ads paid for by third-party groups trying to make her sound like she was a horrible person. So I think that the debates are going to be a good venue in this political environment. Well, let's then talk a little bit about some of these down-ballot races. You've got some people that are going to be really fighting to be lieutenant governor and to be auditor and to be treasurer. What are our thoughts about some of those races?
Well, I think that probably the most hotly contested of those would be the lieutenant governor's race, I would think. You got a formidable opponent in Tim Griffin on one side, and you got Bill Burkhart on the John Burkhart. John Burkhart on the other side, I'm sorry. And so, got a lot of money on both sides. I mean, I know Tim Griffin has a war chest and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to be huge. And going back to your earlier point about whether Northwest Arkansas is an outlier or not, I've seen John Burkhalter in Northwest Arkansas about as many times as I've seen Tim Griffin. So I think Northwest Arkansas is going to continue to be in play. Republican and Democratic candidates are seeking those votes and the money in Northwest Arkansas and around the rest of the state. So I think that that's probably going to be, second to the governors, well, I guess third to the governors and the U.S. Senate race. That's going to be the most watched and highly contested.
And I think there's also no doubt that whether it's the state treasurer race or some of the other down ballot races, we have to remember that outside issues are going to end up impacting those races. I mean, the cloud that hung over our last state treasurer is going to be very instrumental in the kinds of questions that are going to be asked in debates, the kind of media scrutiny that the treasurer candidates are going to get. When we talked a moment ago about the Senate race and the governor's race, possibly even the attorney general race, some of these issues, social issues that are coming up now in terms of the gay marriage debate, and the list goes on. These are going to be questions that are going to be asked of these candidates, and whether or not they come across on television or in person as authentic in terms of their response could be the factor determining whether or not they win or lose.
I think, to go back to your previous question about debates, I think they do matter. I think they're theater, though. They're staged. And the reason it matters now is because of social media. You make one mistake in a debate, and it lives on in perpetuity. And I think that's the real danger for any candidate that's not trained. I don't know that Arkansans go to the polls for down-ballot races. I think they kind of worry about the top of the ticket. But I think in this particular race, because of what you just said, Malcolm, we will have what's called ticket splitters. We'll have people who may vote for Cotton and may turn around and vote for Mike Ross, and may turn around and vote for Dennis Milligan. So, I mean, I think it's going to be a very interesting election.
Well, that's what Malcolm brings up a good point about the scandals. And you talked specifically about the scandals on the Democrat side, but the Republicans had their own scandal too with the fiasco in the lieutenant governor's office with Governor Dar. So what are your thoughts? Will scandal impact these races, or will the scandals just kind of even each other out and create a wash?
I think it erodes public confidence, and I think the effect is going to be, and we saw this in the primary, I mean, extremely low turnout. Voter apathy at a high level. I mean, if you look at the Secretary of State's website, you look at the 0 to 10% of counties that voted, I mean, it's abysmal. So I think when you have scandals on both sides of the party, you have someone who's disengaged, a voter, says, well, they're all crooks, so why should I go vote? So I think it's going to hurt turnout overall.
No, I agree. I think it will hurt turnout overall. And I think that the treasurer's race, I think, will probably be more impacted by the scandal than any other. Simply because that is going to continue to live on in the newspapers. It doesn't seem like it's going to end anytime soon. And so if you have one or two headlines between August and November of just the former treasurer, then that could have somewhat of an impact. I don't think it's going to impact it in a huge way, but I think it could have an impact. Now, as it relates to the lieutenant governor scandal, I think that's past. I think that's over, and I don't think it's going to impact these gentlemen at all who are running for lieutenant governor. I think they'll be able to stand on their own, and I think that scandal is pretty much out of the news.
Well, did you have something else you want to add?
Well, in terms of the lieutenant governor's race, I was just going to say it's helpful that Tim Griffin is basically a known quantity now, particularly in central Arkansas. So no one can say that what the former lieutenant governor did in any way, shape, or form can impact the kind of race that he'll run.
Well, believe it or not, this has been an awesome discussion, but we're down to our last 3 minutes. So I'm going to use them to let each one of you make your prediction for the Arkansas legislative elections, and will the houses flip? I'll start with you, Lamar.
Let's see. I don't think the Senate is in danger of flipping. I think the Senate remains in Republican hands. What's interesting in that race, if you look at Terry Rice and you look at Bruce Holland, that race, and John Burris and his opponent, I can't remember, Flippo, I believe. There again, it speaks to the schism going on in the Republican Party. You have someone who was an architect of private option, supporter of private option. They're ousted or being in danger of being ousted by their own party simply because they wanted to work across party lines to get something done. That's the real danger. But I think Republicans control that. The House, I think, comes back in Democratic hands. I think it's going to be close, but I think that's what we'll see in the fall.
Well, and I have to agree with him in the Senate race. I think that it's going to be, it's going to remain in Republican hands. I don't think there's a real danger. I do agree that there is some, possible infighting, if you will, in the Republican Party, but I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? I think that, the party should embrace new ideas, embrace other candidates who have ideas who they think that will be in the best interest of Arkansans. As it relates to the House, I will kind of differ with him a little bit, of course. I think the House, while it may not necessarily be safe, if you will, I think it's going to be tough for Democrats to take it back over just because I still think that we have a wave of Republicans coming through, and we have some good Republican candidates. So I don't think that there's going to be too much of a jeopardy now. I don't think that we'll have a huge margin, but I think it'll be safe in Republican hands.
I would agree with both of them. I think definitely Senate stays Republican. I think we'll have to wait and see in terms of the House. I would argue even if the Democrats do take over the House, I think the Speaker would probably still end up being a Republican. So it would end up being a net win for Republicans.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
This has been a great, informative, and spirited discussion that I believe our audience enjoyed. And politics, they impact everyone. And my message to the audience is don't be apathetic. Either you can impact politics and elect the people that you choose who have the policies you believe in, or politics and government will just impact you. With that, I want to thank you for watching us, and we'll see you next time. Great show.